Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Staturdays podcast. My name is Kyle Bennison. I'm here with my brother Drew, and we are back
Hey
for
guys.
a new season of Staturdays podcast, and we are also live on Facebook for the first time ever. So thank you so much for anyone that's joining. We're really excited to have you, and it's been a long time. It feels like a long time since our last episode. So we got a lot to cover today. We're going over the Big Ten and Pac-12 conferences postponing their fall football season. Obviously, the biggest news today. Definitely going to talk about that a lot. We also have new Elo ratings. We just tweeted this out this morning and put an article on the website. We have a new rating system that gives us an idea of how these teams are looking coming into the year and gives us different win probabilities. So we're really excited about this stat. It's a bummer that we probably won't be able to use it for a while, but at least we'll have our preseason rankings and everything like that out. So we're really excited about that. And then Drew actually wrote another article about Notre Dame and kind of applied these Elo ratings to give an idea of, them obviously moving to the ACC, what that's going to look like, and how that impacts their outlook on the season and their chances of getting to the college football playoff.
Yeah, so kind of an interesting day to bring I guess it's episode 5 of this season of Staturdays. Um, Came out on a big day in the world of college football. So the biggest news, obviously, we'll start with the news, which is the sad stuff, but then we'll get to, slightly more stat things and
Yeah.
hopeful thinking, I guess, later on. Um, but first, the Big Ten canceled their fall sports seasons, and that happened in this afternoon. And then a little bit later, a couple hours, if even that many hours later, the Pac-12 followed suit and canceled their fall season. And I think they said everything postponed until at earliest January 1st. So they're both going to be looking at plans for the spring, is what I've heard from them, which you'd expect them to. Like they're at least going to consider it and go through the motions to try to figure it out. Um, but so far, nothing from the ACC, SEC, or Big 12 about more postponements or change of schedules or anything. So kind of a sad day, but I guess nothing that we were completely blindsided by. We had been thinking this was, a possibility for a while now, and it just kind of happened today, unfortunately, on
I
the
know.
debut of
I mean, in a way,
Staturdays
it's good because we
live
have the breaking
episodes.
news. We can talk about it right away. It's not something that we were really shocked about. I think, I wrote an article last month that I had wanted to write for several months talking about all the reasons that we probably couldn't play college football in the fall. We heard some rumors over the weekend that there were emergency meetings on Sunday, which why they had to have this, why it became an emergency, I don't know. I feel like you could have seen this coming a mile away. Alleged voting of 12-2, alleged no vote yet, and we're actually meeting on Monday or Tuesday. There was a lot going on, and you could kind of tell, it was at least going to get pushed back. I'd say a month. That was like the minimum that you would think, and they did kind of what everyone had talked about and pushed or punted more appropriately to the spring for now. So yeah, not too shocking in the end, but definitely sad. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, still upsetting.
and another big news, obviously for Penn State fans was, Micah Parsons had already opted out of the fall season, of the potential fall season to prepare for the NFL draft. So that was a big loss, and you could see that more of that was going to be coming. And now that they're considering the spring football season, and we could talk about this a little bit and maybe cover it more in depth in another episode, but, you know, thinking about the spring season, obviously even bigger implications for anybody that's thinking about going into the draft. Like, if your draft spot is kind of solidified already, then why bother with a spring season so close to NFL training camps and NFL regular season for 2021. So that's going to throw in a huge another wrinkle there, and I think it's going to be probably a watered down spring season if it happens at all. And it's too early to say now, but if it happens at all, we're not going to get a lot of these guys in their prime junior years that we were hoping to see. Justin Fields is another one who, he's a big name who is going into, an important year for him. But at the same time, he's also kind of solidified his spot. So does he play? I would think probably not if it's in the spring. which will be a bummer for college football fans. It won't be that big of a bummer for Penn State fans because I'd be happy not to have to face Justin Fields again. Uh, but yeah, a lot going into it, and we'll see what happens down the road. But for now, I think we both were in agreement that it's the right decision for now, and I think delaying is the right decision too. You don't have to cancel everything. I'd happily watch a spring season, whether Micah Parsons is on the field or not. At the end of the day, it's more than just the players. It's the team. It's the fans. It's the tailgating, all that. So we're gonna miss it all for now, and hopefully make the most of it.
Yeah. So with that said, like I mentioned before, there are still three other Power Five conferences who haven't decided or haven't canceled their season yet. All of them have reduced back to conference schedules. So getting rid of the non-conference games or most of the non-conference games and things like that. So I do want to go through here with those three conferences and kind of get a probability from each of us of how likely we are to see at least one game played. So any game in that conference being played this season, and then also the probability of seeing a conference championship game played. So basically, a conference championship game means we've seen the whole regular season. So that's probably 10 games for most of these most of these conferences. So we'll start out with the ACC. Not too much more information coming out from them today. They just kind of reiterated that they are, keeping the health and safety of the players in mind and that thing, and they'll keep reevaluating. So what is your probability for seeing at least one ACC football game played as well as a conference championship game played?
Okay, so the ACC, I think, is the most likely to back out next. So I'm going to say one ACC game, like a 10% chance, and conference championship, not at all, no chance.
Okay. Yeah, I'm pretty similar on the ACC. I think of those three, they're the most likely to kind of follow suit with the Big Ten and the Pac-12. So of seeing one game, I'll go slightly higher. I'll say a 15% chance.
Okay.
And then a conference championship game, I really don't see it making that far. So, less than a 1% chance there. I don't really see that happening. Next up, we can go to the SEC. They've been pretty adamant about wanting to play for a long time now. So for me, I see a single game pretty high. I'll say like a 40 to 50% chance. I'll go right in the middle. I'll say 45% chance of seeing a single game. And then a conference championship game, I still think that's a pretty big hurdle going through a full conference schedule. So I'll give them maybe like a 10%.
10 is pretty high for a conference championship because that's going to, a conference championship we think would require at least like 8 games or something of regular season play. And I feel like a legitimate conference championship would also require every team to play all 8 games without having to quarantine or, skip a game or something. So
yeah, that's true. We didn't specify, I guess, how they get to the conference championship game, but we can pretend that it's deemed legitimate and most teams have played a majority of the games type situation.
Yeah, so I still think that's pretty high. I definitely do think that the SEC is probably the most likely to try to play a game. I'm gonna go with if they handle college football like they've handled COVID in general in the South and just a little bit of a hands-off approach, then I can see it. But part of me wants to believe that the people in charge of the educational institutions of the SEC are going to rely on facts and educational, research and studies and, doctors and scientists to make their decision. I'm hoping that it's probably that they're not going to play just like the rest of the, like the Big Ten and the Pac-12. I don't think the science differs between Alabama and Pennsylvania, so I don't know why they would. I'll give it like a 25% chance that we see at least one game. And then the conference championship, again, I'm going to say like, 1% chance. I don't think they're going to be able to play a conference championship because I can't see them going through the season and not having an outbreak because it's it's one thing if you're training and you're working out and you're only with the team. I mean, it's the summer, it's early August, and these teams are saying we have 0 COVID cases. We've only had 3, and we've administered 1,000 tests or whatever. Or we're testing every day, and that's great for now. And I think it's, obviously it's working, and that's great because you almost do have a quasi bubble within the team, because when you're on campus in the summer as a football player, the only people you hang out with are your teammates, the staff, the coaches. There's no one else on campus to interact with to get you sick, or a lot less, I'll say. So you almost have a bubble, and it's almost a perfect environment. But the second that you start traveling each week to different places to play different teams that are or are not following the exact same protocols as you, and this comes in where, there's lack of leadership from the top, whether it's the conference or from the NCAA as a whole, the protocols aren't going to be the same at every school that you play. So there's a risk there of, contracting the virus during a game. There's a risk when you're traveling anywhere, however they get around, wherever they go. And then I think the biggest risk of all is that you're going to have, for all these schools that are trying to bring kids back to campus, and that might not be the same, even if, you're doing classes online, maybe your opponent's team is not doing classes online. So you're bringing all these kids back to campus, 40,000 kids in some cases, and, your football players some of them are going to interact with these kids and then come to practice. And it's just like inevitable because, and you can say, we're taking it seriously, like these guys are trying to prepare for the pros and all that. And I think that's correct. But, a football team has 100 players and a lot of coaches and staff that, and not all those players are as invested as that top tier that are trying to get to the NFL. They're on the team, they're part of the team, but some of these kids are walk-ons, and some of the walk-ons are going to want to go hang out with their friends on the weekends and, not wear a mask. So that's just the reality of it.
Yeah, and I think another thing is, I think a lot of people thought that when the Big Ten and the Pac-12 canceled, it would be a domino effect to the other conferences, but I think that's not exactly what's seeming to happen yet. But I think if you have the ACC cancel, then that puts a lot more pressure on schools in the SEC
definitely
to want to cancel, because right now with the ACC and the SEC, you can have the argument that you have the 2 best schools in college football still playing, with Clemson and Alabama probably going to be the ones, at least in the playoff, if not the national championship. So you can have a very competitive season with just those 2 conferences making their way to the college football playoff. But I think as soon as, which I think will be the ACC first, actually, I think that'll cause the SEC to kind of follow after that. And then the last one we have here is the Big 12, who I guess I would say has probably been the most quiet about their plans for things, and more just kind of like letting things go for now.
Well, and how many teams
for a single game
are in the Big 12 are in Texas, where, the coronavirus has just been completely out of control for, several months now. That's something to consider too. It's like, we have multiple teams in Texas. I guess, Texas Tech, TCU, Baylor, Texas. Most of the Big 12 is in Texas, or Oklahoma too. So that's something to consider for them too, that it's just like, if we're canceling in the Northeast where the virus has kind of subsided a little bit, then, what the heck is the Big 12 doing? What are they thinking?
Yeah, they just to defend Texas slightly, they have been doing a lot recently in terms of kind of shutting things down more. So they have been kind of increasing their efforts around the coronavirus. But yeah, I think they're probably seeing one game from the Big 12, maybe about like 5 to 10% chance again on a conference championship. Again, I think is less than 1% chance. I think it's very unlikely that we'll see a full season out of them. So lower than
the SEC. Was that lower than the ACC too, or the same?
I honestly don't remember my exact number that I just said, but I would say ACC lowest, then Big 12, then SEC. So if my numbers didn't quite add up to that, just add a few points to whichever one.
And just a reminder,
makes sense.
And hopefully this is working, but now that we're on Facebook Live, feel free to chime in the comments and let us know what you think. If we're way off or if you have more information than us, definitely let us know. I think that's part of the appeal of this live show is that we get to interact with our audience a little bit more. So let us know if you have any issues with our comments at any point throughout the night. So, yeah, I think for the Big 12 for me, play one game. I got to say, like, yeah, less than 5%, 2% or something. I don't think they're going to play. I don't know who their leader is, who their commissioner is, if he or she is a smart, responsible person. But I'm guessing just based on it's just a bad look. When the Pac-12 and the Big Ten are canceling, and you're not. I don't see how you can get by like that. And then conference championship, yeah, like 0-1%.
Yeah, I think there's one more Power Five cancellation that'll probably be the end of things for the fall, but we'll just have to see. It's really, the whole decision-making process, even for the Big Ten, who now, the commissioner has been on TV and they've spoken to coaches and things. It's not completely clear, how all these things are decided, between the role of presidents and athletic directors and things like that. I know everyone is basically involved in the process, but it's very unclear of who ultimately gets the say in going forward with this and how the inter-team dynamics play out when they're in these meetings. So we're really not sure what will happen, but for now we know two conferences have been postponed at least until the spring. So we'll see how that if that happens.
So a little other news that was kind of breaking. I guess this was yesterday, I feel like, or maybe Sunday night when they kind of announced that the Big Ten had voted. All the players, or a lot of college football players, kind of responded with the hashtag "We Want to Play," trying to get their voice heard. And obviously, biggest name Trevor Lawrence, prospective first round number 1 draft pick. He tweeted, and I'm just gonna read it and then we can talk about it because I had big issue with this. But he said, "People are at just as much, if not more, risk if we don't play. Players will all be sent home to their own communities where social distancing is highly unlikely, and medical care and expenses will be placed on the families if they were to contract COVID-19. And then he goes on, but I think my gripe was really with the first tweet in general. So this whole notion that players are at a higher risk if they're not playing football or if they're sent home to their own communities. I guess he's assuming that if they don't play football, they're also not going to have class on campus or not have students on campus because I don't.
Yeah, Clemson is online.
So for
I did
him,
see that.
He's talking about going home and learning online. But what bothers me is where he says, social distancing is now highly unlikely. So this concerns me because I get that. I totally get that the environment that they're setting up in college football is probably fairly safe and probably safer than if I were to go back to work right now in person or, anything like that. Like they're monitoring these kids, they're testing them, they're, enforcing protocols for the most part, except for, Colorado State apparently. But the notion that, well, now that we're not playing football, I'm going to go home and no longer going to social distance, no longer going to take care of myself and do what's responsible. That just seemed like ridiculous to me. It's like, if you're told to go home and not play football, it means go home and don't, be safe. Don't just pretend like nothing's going on all of a sudden. So that kind of rubbed me the wrong way. And, to see all the attention it got, at the end of the day, whether the players want to play or not doesn't really matter. They're young, they're not paid, so I think, them speaking up, like I get why they want to play, and obviously everyone I want to tailgate. We all want to do things right now, but if it's not the safe thing to do, then you can't do it. But anyways, I'm gonna subtract from his Wonderlic score if I'm a scout looking at that tweet.
Yeah, I think I understand where he's coming from because I think part of it is true in that when he says they're they're getting better medical attention, and if they were to contract the coronavirus
Yeah.
at school while playing football, I firmly believe that they would
Yeah.
be in very good hands and probably safer than if you get the coronavirus at home, where you're less likely to be able to see a doctor right away, things like that. Like if you're on a football player and you get the coronavirus, they'll have a staff ready for you and keep you very safe. I agree with that. But yeah, the part that I think kind of takes away from maybe his good point in that second point, which is like, yeah, some people don't have great resources at
Yeah.
home and the school offers those when you play football. That's true. But the part about basically
Disregarding
what you
any
said is that
rules.
no one's going to social distance if you can't play football. It's just irresponsible to say that, and you're basically kind of forcing like, oh, let me
Yeah.
play or
Yeah.
else. Like, look what I'm going to do. I'm going to not social distance. Like, it just kind of takes away from maybe the point he was trying to make. So yeah, I think it was just maybe poorly worded
Yeah.
or something to that effect. But yeah, I don't agree with the
Well, and
first part, like you
the
said.
other thing is like I said before, I'm sure it's a very safe environment right now when they're only having to deal with the 200 or so, staff and players that are there. But, the second I mean, and I guess maybe Trevor Lawrence is coming from a different situation where if classes are online and they're not, I don't know if they are or not telling kids that they cannot come back to campus. But if he's in a situation where nobody else is coming to campus, then yeah, he's in a great environment. But if North Carolina or Notre Dame or any of the teams he's playing are doing anything differently, then he's not in a safe environment. And I think, definitely for Penn State, who's going to have kids back on campus soon, their practices are very safe right now. But the second that there's 40,000 extra people on campus, it becomes harder to social distance. That's just the reality of it. And even some teams are struggling to social distance, without students there because we look at Rutgers and they had a party with the football team and I think like some other athletes on other teams and they had double-digit COVID numbers in the next couple days. So they can't even keep control of themselves over the summer and training camp. And you're only in this virus, you're only as strong as your weakest link. So I think that's kind of what you worry about with teams like that don't have control over all their players all the time.
Yeah, and there will never be a situation where you kind of do have that complete control over. I mean, you've seen it even in the MLB, which is probably the closest to college
Right.
football of the major sports that are
They're not in a
playing,
bubble.
because they're the
Yeah.
only one not in a complete bubble. But they're kind of similar to college football in that they're with their team most of the time. So you could say you're relatively safe among your team. But the players they go home when they're playing in their local ballpark. They are staying with their families and things like that. And that's kind of the same situation with college football as people go back and they all room together. So you don't have the going home part, but you're still interacting with others and being in the same classrooms and things like that if you're taking in-person classes. So I think the MLB is kind of a
Proxy. Yeah.
good analogy to what we're seeing. Yeah,
Yeah,
to
I
what we're seeing in
agree.
college football right now.
So do you want to
Um,
move
yeah,
on and talk some actual stats here and talk about Elo ratings? Okay, go
yeah. I
ahead.
do just want to say one more thing because I feel like I've seen a lot on Twitter with sports reporters, and you and I are not sports reporters, so we're not in the same class as them, and like not trying to do the same job. But I just found it very disheartening with all the negative comments when people who are reporters and commenting on these things, whenever they say anything about the potential of a cancellation or the dangers
Yeah.
of COVID-19, people assume that they're like anti-sports, where these people want like the reporters and saw people go
Yeah.
after the Big Ten commissioner today. Those people want
Anyone, yeah.
sports more than anyone in the world. The Big Ten commissioner's job is, you know,
On
getting sports
TV and
played
yeah.
and making these yeah, and getting these student athletes to be able to play their favorite sport and progress to the next level. And then you have people commenting that he's doing a terrible job and he doesn't care about the sports and things like that. So, yeah, I just think that
Yeah.
needs to be said, that when you talk negative about the sports or the season or if we should have it. It doesn't mean you are against it and wouldn't prefer it. It's just kind of expressing both sides
Yeah, I
of the
definitely feel
situation.
for the commissioner and yeah, all the reporters. I'm thinking of like Darren Ravel right now because he's been constantly, tweeting out kind of like facts, and people do not like facts. They don't like when you tell them there's positive cases on a team, and he literally just reports the numbers, like you said, and people get all up in arms. And I mean, I saw it myself when I posted the article about why we shouldn't play college football in the fall. Right away there was a lot of comments, and people disagreed and they didn't like it, and they paint a negative picture. And the reality is, it's like, we're bummed that we don't have college football. I mean, we think it's the right decision, and we think it's the smart and the safe thing to do. I mean, we're all kind of going through this together, learning and trying to keep each other safe. So we think it's the best thing to do. But that doesn't mean that I'm not upset that I can't do our week 1 Elo projections because ESPN doesn't even know what the schedule is anymore. So, we don't even know. And, I'm
Yeah.
bummed that I'm not going to be able to drive up to Penn State this fall and, tailgate and see my old friends. So, it affects everyone. And I think, the notion that anybody is rooting for college football, some people might be rooting for things like that have an agenda, like schools being closed or something like that, or whatever, or schools being open, whatever they want. But I don't know anyone that would root against college football just because, there's no ulterior motive there. You can't. Everyone loves college football.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree. I just wanted to say that because I don't want people to think
Yeah,
that we're
yeah,
against this all of a sudden. We are called Staturdays, which is in reference to the Saturday
yeah.
of college football. So, but yeah, we have some better news ahead, and maybe we'll see college football this fall. So we never know. But we had a couple of articles go up the last two, even clearer than that, last week and a half or so. So Kyle, we can start with yours. So we had come up with Elo ratings for college football. We have been talking about doing this for probably, I
Couple
guess,
months, yeah.
a couple months now. Yeah, and we got it out. So do you want to just kind of explain
Yeah.
what Elo ratings are and what kind of goes into
Yeah, so
calculating them
you
and what they can
actually
be
were the
used
one
for?
that brought this idea to me in the first place because you actually implemented something similar for your other blog, The Single Seater, that does IndyCar stats. And I thought it was really interesting because you can use it to get win probabilities. And the other nice thing about it is that it kind of like self corrects as a season or as multiple seasons go on. So what it is, it's just a single number that is a team's rating, and the average for that rating is 1,500, and that's where a team starts at the beginning of history. Whenever you first start to calculate Elo ratings, and in our case, we started with the 2000 college football season. Every team is assigned 1,500 points, and then after each game, you check what the outcome was versus what Elo expected the outcome to be with win probabilities, and then you correct each team's Elo rating after that game. So they either move up or they move down, and then you use that as your new baseline for the next game. So over time, the better teams keep winning and their score keeps going up, and the worst teams keep losing and their score goes down. And what it does is that it'll also make bigger adjustments if there's a big upset. So if you have a low win probability and you end up winning, then that game gets more weight and you accelerate your rise to the top faster than if you're beating teams that you're supposed to beat. And you definitely check out the article. I think we did a really good job of writing it in a way that's easy for everyone to understand. So I won't get into all the math right now. But that's the basic gist, is that, you have a value that's assigned to you on 1,500 to start, and then you move up or down as the season goes on and as the years go on to evaluate, how good your team is, basically. And another thing to note is that, you do your season, you have your final Elo rating for the season, and then at the start of next season, your number regresses back towards the mean of 1,500. So what that looks like is, if you're at a 2,000 Elo rating at the end of the season, you're going to revert back to the mean, down to like let's just say 1,900 for the start of the next season. And if you're a worse team and you're under 1,500 and you're like at 1,000, then you're going to regress up to like 1,100 or something like that. And that value differs based on the sport. But in college football, in our analysis, what we found was 95% of your team's value from the previous year is kept, which is really high compared to things like the NFL, where I think 538 uses 67%. I think the NBA might use like 3/4, 75%. So definitely the highest number that I've seen in anything so far. But that's the basic gist of Elo ratings.
Yeah, and I think just bouncing off the regression thing, one of the reasons for that, uh, we don't know the exact reason for it, but my hypothesis would be that in college football, you're really recruiting, 3 years out and 4 years out for your team. So it takes a long time for that to kind of, if you're having a bad recruiting streak, it probably takes more than 1 year to really affect your future team, because your team in 1 year and the next year are probably very similar. You're going to lose some people, and you might lose, a lot of people on offense or defense. But overall, a lot of the players are going to be there again just because of the nature of college football, where you're there for, 4 years or 3 years if you go to the draft early. But yeah, a lot of very similar teams
And
year to year.
sorry, another thing that I'd say about that is that I also think there's a lot of there's a lot of inequity in college football where there's no draft, right? There's no the worst teams one year get the best recruits the next year. It's usually the best teams this year get the best recruits the next year because kids want to play at the best school. So if you're the best high school player, you want to play at the best college. So, the 5-star recruits see that Clemson is winning and they want to go tour at Clemson and Clemson wants them. And so I think there's a bit of a cyclical nature to college football, which I think we've talked about in the past. There's only been, I think, like 8 teams that have had a national championship in the past like 16 or 20 years or something. I think we talked about that on COVID times podcast. It's still COVID times, but so I think there's definitely a bit of a cyclical nature of, the good teams get the good recruits and stay good, and the worst teams, struggle a little bit more.
Yeah, and also one of the good things about Elo ratings is by design, the difference between two teams' Elo ratings gives you the probability of each team winning a game. So they were originally introduced for ranking chess players, but have since then been used for NFL, club soccer, international soccer, especially basketball. Pretty much most head-to-head sports can be successfully modeled with Elo rating to varying degrees of success. But if you go and check out the article on our website, you can actually see the predicted win probability by our Elo model against the actual win rate of those teams, and you can kind of tell for yourself how accurate it is. And one of the good things, but also the downsides about Elo is just how few things go into it. So like Kyle already mentioned kind of what goes into Elo ratings, and that's great for interpretability, but there are definitely some downsides. So when we'll talk about this more, when games start happening and talking about betting a little bit, Elo is a really great baseline probability to start your research with. But then you definitely need to add some, context to the week's matchup and things like that. One thing we're looking to hopefully find a way to add is a kind of a dummy variable for if the starting quarterback is playing in that game, because, quarterback is the most important position on the field. And if the quarterback is injured or is out that game, that's really going to affect the team's win probability. So there's definitely improvements that we can make to it. But already we've been very pleased with its performance looking at, back-tested years starting, I guess, from 2000 to 2019.
Yeah, we have a pretty cool plot on the article where you can see actually what Elo predicted a game would result in, from 0% win probability to 100% or 99%, and then what the actual average win rate for those teams was. So, for teams that had a 95% win probability, we found that they actually won the game 96% of the time. On the flip side, if they were predicted to win the game 5% of the time, they actually won 6% of the time. So you can actually look at that linear relationship that we have and see how close our predictions are to the actual results. So I think it's a pretty cool tool that we'll be able to play with throughout the season, whenever that may be, and it'll be a great way to kind of give you those win probabilities. And you mentioned betting. I think it's a good tool to use, and you've already kind of tested it out in IndyCar with some favorable results. So we're hoping to see something similar with college football, but it's definitely a good tool to give you information so that, if Elo is saying, this game is a 95% win probability for a team, but the betting lines are kind of indicating something less than that, then that might be an opportunity, to buy there. So we'll definitely keep you up to date on that. We're going to be coming out with our 2020 rankings based on Elo. So you'll be able to see that. And then whenever week 1 happens, and this is actually going to be really difficult if some conferences are playing and others are not. I'm going to have to really dive into the code and make sure that we don't have any issues here. But, whenever the week 1 happens, we'll be able to give you win probabilities for all the matchups. So we're really excited about that. We're looking forward to it. And so far, it seems like everyone's really interested in it. So we're definitely going to, refine it and keep it going. And then, Drew, you actually used our Elo ratings to do a little bit of initial analysis because Notre Dame is moving into the ACC this year, which is I think a lot of fans are happy about that because people always complain about Notre Dame not being in the conference, and Notre Dame always complains that they're getting left out of the playoff and that they're not being treated fairly. So I think this, if the ACC plays, this is the perfect opportunity for them to kind of prove it and be like, yes, we are actually as good as Clemson and all these top teams. Unfortunately, the ACC is not that deep in terms of talent, so Clemson's going to be the real test, and it's kind of a one-off game. But you actually look to see if their schedule was more favorable towards them getting into the college football playoff in the ACC versus not in the ACC. So tell us about what you found there.
Yeah, so the interesting thing about Notre Dame's schedule is they're already kind of partnered with the ACC. So 6 of their games on their original schedule were already against ACC opponents, which is, part of the reason that they just kind of joined them for 2020 is they already had this agreement. So basically for each of their schedules, so their old schedule and now the revised ACC schedule, I just kind of found the Elo rating, the current Elo rating of each of their opponents, and then found the win probability of them for each game. So in their old schedule, their average opponent Elo rating was 1706, and their average opponent Elo rating in their new schedule is 1730. So 24 points higher, which isn't a huge difference. Elo rating difference of 24 points, is a couple, probably not even a full percentage point in win probability if 2 teams were split by that. So in their original schedule, they were projected 9.8 wins. But because of the different length of the schedules now, since they're cutting out some non-conference games, it's better to look at projected win percentage. So the percentage of their total games that they're going to win. So in their original schedule, I had them at an 81.6% win probability for their whole season. So I expected them to win 81.6% of their games on average. And that went up a tenth of 1 percentage point when looking at the revised schedule, which isn't a huge difference. So ultimately, you can say their schedules are pretty much similar. And
right. And is that Elo rating and the new Elo rating with or without the last minute addition of their non-conference game?
So this is
because I remember they added someone after the fact that was lower rated. And I remember you had mentioned some sort of threshold where their actual schedule would be easier if they got an opponent of this caliber or lower.
Yeah, so if their new non-conference opponent has an Elo rating of 1465 or less, so slightly below average, then their average opponent Elo rating for their new schedule will actually be lower than their old one. And what they did in all the craziness of the season, they added Western Michigan, who have an Elo rating of 1491, and they were going to play them originally as well. However, then Western Michigan's season was canceled, so they're
So I
back
missed
off
that
the
part.
schedule. Um, yeah, it was within like 2 days or so because I think
Okay.
Western Michigan's in
Yeah,
the
that sounds
MAC
right.
if I'm correct. So yeah, they had it canceled. So yeah, they were going to schedule Western Michigan again. So now they don't have a game for their non-conference yet. So I'm sure if the season goes forward, they'll find someone who's available to play. It will be interesting actually to see who that is because the group of five, the next five conferences outside the Power Five, I think two of them have canceled, um, if not more. So yeah, it is interesting who they'll schedule in terms of Elo rating, but also, like I said, they have a pretty similar schedule in terms of strength. But as I write in the article, and you can read, I really think they have a much better chance of making. I mean, this was before the Big Ten and the
Now they have
Pac-12
an even
canceled, but I
better
think they have a
chance.
much better chance of making. They do. So when I wrote this, we can imagine that you have a
Yeah.
regular Power Five conference season, and I was arguing that they'll have a much better chance to make the playoffs in the ACC because they can lose a game and still win the conference. So if they lose a game to Clemson but wind up playing them again in the conference championship, for example, if you're the ACC champion
Yeah.
when there's all the Power Five conferences also playing, you're going to go to the college football playoff. You know, probably 99% of the
Especially if
time,
you beat
as long
Clemson.
as other
I
things
mean,
don't go.
at the strength that they're at right
Yeah,
now, current Clemson, if you beat them once or twice, whatever it may be, it doesn't matter. I think, well, it matters if it's in the championship or not. If you beat them in the championship, then I think, yeah, you definitely go. They'd probably send
yeah,
Clemson too.
and
Now
honestly,
they
well, now
did.
they
Now they
now
definitely
they
would.
definitely would. Um, but yeah, so I think as Notre Dame as an independent, they're not at a disadvantage in terms of their TV deal and how much money that's worth it for them, but they are at a disadvantage for the playoff because it's very hard to go through as independent. I mean, the time they've made the playoff once in an undefeated year, but without being undefeated, it's
Yeah.
pretty difficult to convince the playoff to pick them and leave out, two Power Five conferences. And that really is what had to cause them to schedule some better opponents in their independent because they have to play.
Yeah.
They had scheduled Wisconsin, Stanford, Clemson, USC, some higher hitting teams. But as soon as you're in a Power Five conference, you're good to just play whatever they give you, and
Yeah,
no one can
because
really
you don't
fight
have
you
any
on it.
control over it at that point. Whereas the independents, if they look at them and they say, "Oh, well, they didn't schedule any tough games," then that's their fault all of a sudden. But in the Big Ten, your schedule is set for you. I mean, you get your out of conference games, but
Yeah,
other than that, it's set for you. So yeah, I definitely agree that I think they're at a much bigger advantage and ability to make the college football playoff in the ACC for all the reasons that you said.
yeah. So I encourage you to just check that out if you haven't yet for a little more of the write up on my explanation of it. But yeah, it's a really, it's an interesting use of Elo ratings and something that hopefully we'll be able to do for some more teams
Yeah,
when we
yeah,
see
we'll
some
see.
college football.
And another note about that is that once we do start getting some games played and can actually talk about our weekly win probabilities, we're gonna send that out in a newsletter every week. So if you're interested, you can subscribe now. We'll see when we actually start sending it, just based on the uncertainty. But the idea is that once we're playing, weekly college football, and we can, make these predictions, then we'll send out a weekly win probabilities and information on the upcoming week. So if you want to subscribe to that, it's completely free. You can go to Staturdays.substack.com and subscribe. It's Staturdays.substack.com.
Yeah. Well, I think that about does it for our
Yeah.
first live show here. So thank you for those of you who have joined us in person. And if you're listening to the podcast, thank you for listening. And hopefully we'll have some, better college football news consistently as the weeks go on here. But either way, we plan on doing this podcast, and depending on what happens, we can branch into some other
Yeah.
sports if we
I
have
should
to.
mention that too because
Hopefully,
we
we'll
have
have some.
Brian coming back for his second year with Staturdays. He's going to be writing not only about Penn State, but we told him to just go for it. If there's no college football, there's stats in other sports. He's a big Yankees fan, so he's a great writer, and we're really excited to see what he does. Hopefully, we can get him on the podcast at some point too, and on the live show. So yeah, really excited about that too because there's plenty of stuff out there that he wants to talk about. So I'm looking forward to hear what he has to say too. And other than that, I would also just say thank you for listening, whether it's live today or on the podcast. If you watch the live show and you have any feedback, let us know because this was obviously our first one, but hopefully it went smoothly. And if you're on iTunes, rate our podcast, give us 5 stars. Make sure you share this with your friends if you think this is interesting. And we're also going to post the live shows on our YouTube channel as well so that you can watch them back if you didn't get to see it live on Facebook. Next week, we're on vacation, so we will not be doing the live show or the podcast. But then hopefully when we come back the week after, we'll have, like Drew said, some good college football news, and maybe we can start talking about some actual games. So looking forward to that. Hope you guys are all staying safe, and thank you for joining, and we'll talk to you next time. See you guys.
Yep. See ya.